Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel, and if you are new here, I am Mariana and I interview the brightest minds of physical therapy. So if you want to increase your knowledge, start right now by subscribing to this channel, clicking on the bell so you don't miss anything, give us a thumbs up and share with your friends. Today our guest is Dayle Shackel and he's going to talk about spine stress fractures in cricket. Dayle works for New Zealand Cricket as the medical manager and high-performance physical therapist, where he manages the contract group of domestic and international team physical therapists, manages the long-term injury athletes for contract players, and provides physical therapy services for New Zealand cricket teams. I hope you enjoy the show. Hi Dayle, welcome to PT Pro Talk. How are you today?
Good, thanks Mariana. Thank you very much for the invitation and hope everything's going well for you.
Yeah, sure. So let's jump right in. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your career, and how did you get to where you are right now?
Yeah, sure. So I'm from New Zealand, grew up in the South Island of New Zealand, in Christchurch first and then Dunedin, went to high school there and then in Dunedin and then on to the Otago School of Physiotherapy. And then from there I moved, my first job back out of physio school was in Christchurch. So I moved back up here and that was with a physio called Graeme and his wife Marie. Graeme was a well-known physio in New Zealand. He was a Mackenzie teacher. And sadly, he passed away a couple of years ago, which was very sad. But he was great, both him and Marie. So that was my first job, which obviously was an emphasis on back pain. Graeme was quite a well-known physio in New Zealand around that back pain stuff, so he treated a lot of back pain. So that got me on that path, and obviously there was a bias there towards the Mackenzie method. So we got a good introduction into that, and I think Graeme was very, very clever. He was very good with his clinical reasoning and things like that. So I learned a lot from Graeme. So that was in a private practice. I also worked in a hospital part-time as well, and that was in the oncology ward. So that was a nice balance, if you like, between the private practice and the hospital, especially oncology, where you're dealing with sometimes a lot of sadness and things that go along with those things, unfortunately. And then with Graeme, I suppose there was the sporting part. Graeme was involved with quite a few sports. There was basketball here in Christchurch with the Canterbury Rams, they were winning the national competition quite regularly. They had a very well-known coach, Keith Meyer, and he was a very interesting guy. There was also Canterbury cricket, which Graeme was the physio for, and that kind of got me into the cricket side of things. I played a little bit of cricket back in the day, but then very quickly moved more into being physio and working alongside the cricket, and then that took me down the path of cricket. There was a New Zealand Cricket Academy that was based in Christchurch. Graeme was the physio for that, and we got involved there. And then that led me into being the team physio for the New Zealand cricket team, men's team. And then once I stopped doing that, I moved into a desk job at New Zealand Cricket. And that's where I am now.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about your journey. So how has your journey been in professional cricket as a PT so far?
Yeah, so I suppose I started that semi-professional type of thing, which was around the Cricket Academy and Canterbury Cricket, and it was very semi-professional. They did get paid a little bit, but not a lot. A lot of them had jobs and things as well. And then I went and moved in from what they were calling New Zealand A and New Zealand Under-19. There was a World Cup for the Under-19 team, which I went to, which was in Sri Lanka. And that was my real first tour as far as cricket goes. And that was a real, having never been, I've been to England overseas, but never been to anywhere really else. So going to Sri Lanka was a real eye-opener. And there was a few troubles there in Sri Lanka at the time with the Tamil Tigers, and there was some, suicide bombings and things. So coming from New Zealand, and then coming into that situation, which did happen while we were there, that was a kind of a real eye opener for.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So these pretty reasonably, naive, New Zealand fellas going into that kind of situation was an eye opener for sure. So, and then from there, the job with the New Zealand men's team became vacant, and then I applied for that and ended up getting that role, and that was in about 2000, and in about 2002 there was a significant I suppose episode in New Zealand cricket where the players became more recognised by New Zealand cricket, and there was a bit of a disagreement and between the players and the organisation. So the players created their own, you would call it a union, but an association if you like, and then they got a cut of so it ended up with the players getting a percentage of the total revenue of New Zealand cricket, which is pretty much a well recognised thing in world sport now. So that was a big event, and that probably I think brought around a whole different level of professionalism. So the players were being paid more, and I think the sport at that time as well was becoming more professional. It was the players were becoming fitter, the game was becoming faster. There was a greater emphasis on speed and hitting the ball further, bowling the ball faster. So I think in that era there was a big shift, and for me that was coming from a clinic and then dealing with basically professional athletes, it was quite a big shift from just treating injuries to then how do we perhaps prevent some of these injuries. So that injury prevention side of things became a lot greater emphasis on that. And so that took me through to 2008 when I finished. There was a change of coach, and professional sport, there was a change of coach. So those things mean there was a bit, change of staff, if you like, within the team and all that kind of stuff. So I moved aside. I went to India and that was there's a league at the moment called the IPL, the Indian Premier League, and in 2008, 2009 there were two leagues starting. One was called the Indian Cricket League, the other one was the Indian Premier League. I was in what they called the ICL. These two leagues were competing, if you like, and the IPL won out, and so the ICL league folded in the end. But again, that was another catalyst it brought. That was where the international game, there was a lot more money became into for the players, franchise-based sport. Being involved in India, it's a massive sport in India, and the focus on it is huge. So that was again a different focus for me. It was dealing with different types of players. Then you were starting to deal with Indian-based players, South Africans, English. So that was really cool. Even though it only lasted for a short period of time, but the IPL as it is now is ongoing, and it's this huge tournament. And then I've come into more. We have a high performance unit at New Zealand Cricket, which it was very much centralised when I was touring with the Black Caps, but then it became decentralised. So they disbanded the high performance unit at New Zealand Cricket with an idea that it would be put into the domestic areas, but it really needed to come back to create more competition and greater standards and things, so that we now have a bit of a combination of decentralised organisations, but with a centralised part as well, which is where I work. So my role there is now medical manager. So it's we have physios with the domestic teams. We have physios with our international teams, doctors with our international teams, and I help to manage them. So, and then also I manage the long-term rehabilitation of our centrally contracted players, our top 20 players, when they're unable to be touring or playing, and also help out with some of our New Zealand-based teams, which are our New Zealand under-19s or New Zealand A teams. So it's a reasonably diverse range of things that I do. I think certainly now that the emphasis on the physios within the teams is really big. There's a lot we do around the trauma cover for cricket. There was a big event in about 2013 with an Australian-based player who died after being hit in the head while he was playing. It's a guy called Phil Hughes. So that was obviously a really sad event, but a big event, which kind of brought about, again, cricket being sort of seen as a easy kind of gentlemanly game, and into this suddenly there's a really sad accident, which sort of brought the focus on going, gosh, we've got to be able to provide some more cover. So physios have become the focus of that, of providing that kind of basic trauma cover. Concussion management, again, is a big thing, as you know, in America. So that's a big thing in cricket as well at the moment, and how we diagnose and how we manage, and potentially the long-term consequences of those things, which everyone's trying to find out. And now COVID, and how we help to manage that type of situation, and both domestically, and then of course our players going over and playing internationally at various areas. And as we know at the moment, we're going to England very shortly, and we've got some players that are playing in this tournament, this IPL tournament in India at the moment. So it's a challenging time, and the physio side of things is certainly diversifying, and there's greater sort of skills or things that are being required of us in the team situation.
Okay. And I had no idea that India was so big on this part. I don't know, we are probably not very familiar. I'm not very familiar with this part, but I've been researching and listening to you talking about India. That was a surprise.
Yes. They're huge. I mean, obviously massive country population-wise. It's by far and away their national game. And with their increasing middle class, if you like, their TV, their TV rights are huge. So financially, India has become basically the epicenter of cricket in the world because of the TV rights and all those kinds of things. So yeah, it's definitely a huge market, and and they love their cricket, so that they're great supporters and things. Wherever you go in the world, if India's playing, there'll be thousands of people come out to watch. That's
for sure. And just for the ones that are not familiar with the sport, can you just really quickly just explain? They were wondering maybe what we were talking about in these concussions and all of this. So just give us like a brief summary about how the sports work.
Yeah, gosh, cricket, it's a challenging thing to explain to people. So it's 11 aside, so that's probably the easy thing. So there's 11 players, and within that there's different skill sets. It's probably closer aligned to something like baseball. There's batting and what we call bowling, which is, I suppose, the similar thing to pitching. But bowling is done with a straight arm. It's more like javelin throwing, if you like. So there's a run up and then a jump and a propel the ball down the pitch. The pitch is 22 yards long, and then there's two batters from the opposing team at each time, and they have some wickets. The idea is to try and they defend their wickets. The bowlers are trying to attack the wickets, similar to baseball. So if you miss the ball and it hits the wickets, you're out. if you obviously, and then if you hit the ball and get caught in the outfield, then you're out as well, and then another batter comes in. So that's kind of a brief thing, and then we'll get on to the bowling side of things, I'm sure, Mariana, as we talk about the injuries. But the formats we have, not so slightly different to baseball, if you like. We have 3 different formats. So we have what we call a T20, which is 20 overs a side, and an over is 6 balls. So the bowler bowls 6 balls, or pitches 6 balls, if you like. That's an over, and so 20 overs a side is the short format. We then have a 50 over a side game. So the 20 over game takes about 3 hours. The 50 over game takes a whole day, so that's 6 hours. And then we have test match cricket, which is 5 days of playing. So
oh, wow.
5 days. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So that's 90 overs in a day times 5. And they split that into, so there's basically, ideally, there's 2 innings each. So each team goes through their batting twice in that 5-day period. And then obviously whoever scores the most runs wins the game. The hard thing, I think, for a lot of people to understand is, you can play for 5 days and not get a result. So you can get a draw where you haven't got the opposition out and they haven't got the runs. So that's the hard thing, I think, for for people to kind of get their heads around, that you can play for 5 days and still not get a result. But it does happen. So that's kind of, I suppose, that's cricket in essence.
So that gives us a little bit an idea about the injuries. That's our next topic. So if you're playing for 5 days straight, I imagine the amount of injuries that you probably see. So I know that you treat a lot of athletic back pain, specifically stress fractures, right? So why are they common, and how do you manage this type of back problems?
Yes. You're right. The bowlers generally, so they are the ones that tend to get injured the most because it's the most physically demanding activity. The injuries, so as said, similar to pitching, but the difference is that there's a run up now with the fast bowlers. Now, for an example, a fast bowler generally will bowl between 130 and 155 at the top end Ks an hour. So that's down a 22-metre pitch. So you can imagine someone
super fast.
Yes. Oh, so, and super scary if you're at the other end having to try to. Yeah. So, and the difference again, I suppose, with baseball, with the bowling and cricket, the idea is that you hit the wicket. So you rather than the pitching, which goes through on the full, bowling, you hit the pitch, and the pitch does obviously various things. The ball can bounce and move around a little bit. So again, that makes it probably even harder. And the bowlers are trying to swing the ball as well, which is another dimension. We're a bit like pitching, with the breaking ball and all that kind of thing. So that's an idea of the speed, I suppose. 130, 155 probably is the top end of things. And they normally would run between 20 and 30 metres. So that's an idea of their run up. So they'll run up, and they get to generally about 80 to 90% of their maximum running speed during that run up. So they're going pretty quick. Then they and like if you can imagine a javelin thrower, they have this little jump and then basically stop everything and let their arm come over and bowl. So it's a really hugely demanding activity on the body. It's a pretty silly thing to do, really, from a body point of view, because it's hugely, to run up almost 80 to 90% of your maximum speed, then suddenly have a little jump and just stop suddenly. You can imagine the stresses that are going through the body at that point in time. You're probably at bowling at delivery, you're talking 7 to 10 times body weight going through the front leg as they pivot over the top of that. So the big injury from a bowling point of view, like you said, Mariana, is the stress fractures. So lumbar spine stress fractures. That's the big one, and with fast bowlers especially, it happens reasonably frequently. We probably might get in a squad, you might get one or two a year, but the fast bowlers are generally the bowlers that win your games. So they're generally the ones that you want in your team. A wee bit like your pitching, they win your games. So they're hugely important. And when you lose one, it's a big event, obviously for the athlete, but for the team as well. The reason that's so devastating, that it takes you out generally, 6 to 12 months, depending on how bad it is. So that's why it's so sort of devastating, because once you have it, you're done for the season, if not the year. So that's so it's a big event now, and like we said, those variations of game. Obviously, the 5-day game. So bowlers can in that 5-day period. So if you're thinking overs, they could bowl. Sometimes they'll bowl 60 overs in a 5-day game. So that's 60 times 6 deliveries. With all those ground reaction forces and all the rest of it. So that's just in a 5-day period. So that's and basically the more they bowl, the more risk they have of these injuries occurring. So volume or load is a real issue for us that we try and manage as best we can. We try and avoid spikes and things in load. So where they have a baseline of bowls that they've delivered, and then they suddenly go way above that. It could be 2 or 3 times above their normal weekly load, and that's a real problem. Very similar to pitching. You have pitch counts and all those things in baseball. It's a very similar concept in bowling. We've probably stolen it a little bit from baseball and just extrapolated it into cricket, but it's the same principle. Same principle. You try and manage their load, the amount of balls that they bowl, and if they have a spike in those loads for whatever reason, then you try and manage them out the other end of it as well.
That's crazy. That's how much stress they can put to their bodies.
Yes.
So once they have these stress fractures, so how do you deal with them? And is there, with your experience, a specific way of preventing this to happen, or is just the mechanics of the sports that you can not do much about it? Or
$64 million question, Mariana. If you could answer that, you would be a very rich lady. But yes, it's obviously a combination of a lot of things. So one is the action, so the type of action that you have when you bowl the ball. There's various things that people have tried to look at, which is what they call counter rotation, which is where the hips and the shoulders and the separation of those, and the greater that degree of counter rotation, the greater the risk of having a stress fracture. The amount of bowling that you do, obviously the more you bowl, the greater the stress or the greater the risk. The anatomy, so your own, your personal anatomy, you can have some probably some subtle variations that would put you at more risk than another group. I think, and that's all a lot of things. That's your bony morphology, that's your your muscle architecture, it's your height, all those things. How fast you bowl becomes another risk factor. So there's a huge amount of things, but probably the two, when I say the things that you can probably manage, one is the load, so how much you're bowling and those. So that's one thing you can manage. And I think the fitness side of things, the conditioning, your strength, are probably the two big ones that we're probably focusing on mostly at the moment to try and prevent these things. The action is often what makes these guys and ladies do what they do, which is to bowl fast, it often the action they use is often looked at as being problematic. But if you change that, you potentially slow them down, which means they're not doing what they've been deemed to be good at. So changing actions is it's a difficult thing to do, but it's also potentially it's a problematic thing to do in that it can actually stop them doing what they've been good at. So we probably look at the other end of things, which is to manage their bowling load really minutely, if you like, and then keep them fit and strong. Probably the two big ones.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And then, do you have any control, since that is so frequent? Do they do periodic exams to kind of try to track that and don't let it, if it's starting, or I don't know if there is a way to kind of try to stop the process, or I suppose.
Very good. Yes, you're going well there, Mariana. You're picking up very quickly. You could become a cricket physio very easily. There is, and it's very interesting you say that, because the Australian group, basically they've been really instrumental, I think, in this area, and their monitoring, as you said. So there is with MRI. So there's a group there, and they've looked at what they call the bone marrow edema. So when you have an MRI, so you can look at if there's a bright spot in the MRI, and we're looking into the pars and the pedicles and all those kind of posterior elements. And they've managed to sort of measure this, what they call the bone marrow edema ratio. So they're looking at if there's a bright spot in those areas of concern, and then they look at the vertebral body, which is at the same level. And then they basically look and see at how much greater is that brightness, if you like, compared to what would you call the control, which is the vertebral body. And that there is certainly some evidence there that the more bone marrow edema you have, the more risk there is that you're going to go on to develop a problematic or symptomatic stress fracture. So this is based on doing serial monitoring of asymptomatic bowlers. So they've got no pain, but they will put them through these MRIs and see if they're creating some bone marrow edema, and then perhaps pull them out of matches, if you like, for a period of time and let it settle, and then maybe in 2 or 3 weeks review again, see if the bone marrow edema's settled down again, and then they'll carry on again. So yeah, in answer to your question, Mariana, yes, there is sort of the use of that of MRI is being used reasonably well now, especially in Australia. They're doing it very well. Obviously, cost is a factor. So I don't know. And for instance, in Australia, an MRI might be $200 or $300. So they can kind of, it's something that is manageable. But in New Zealand, it's, MRIs generally are about $1,000, roughly between $1,000 and $1,500, New Zealand, that is. So trying to monitor it becomes very expensive. So we're not doing that, which is just because we can't afford to do it really. Other places, I'm not sure. Again, America might be different, and certainly I know in India and Australia, the MRIs are certainly a lot more cost effective, and it's a very good way of helping to manage these, or preventing them from becoming full-blown stress fractures. We know that a stress reaction, if you like, is so just some what you call it, so a bit of bone reaction without any fracture as such, that will heal a lot better and a lot stronger potentially than like a partial stress fracture. The danger is that it goes into a full stress fracture, and that's a fracture all the way through the pars. They're difficult to heal, and if you have an unhealed stress fracture on one side, you're likely to develop another one on the other side, which means you end up with a spondylolisthesis potentially. So that whole segment becomes a little bit unstable. So that's the reason for trying to prevent them, because once they get a hold on, they're pretty hard to manage from there.
Yeah, so I'm curious to ask you about the treatment now, because I was a gymnast when I was a kid, younger, and I had a stress fracture on my back. Actually, I had 3. And when I was 11 years old, I think it was the first one. So I remember when I went to the doctor, he was like, even if you sit, if I tie you to a bed, you are never going to heal. You are never going to be able to practice, train again. And then I was like 11 years old. I was like just crying for months at home. My mom didn't know what to do with me. So I'm curious, of course, that was many years ago. The medicine advanced a lot. And I'm sure people more specialized in sports, they have a different approach, doctors, physios. So I'm just curious to ask you, so how is the treatment once you are diagnosed, you have a stress fracture? So what are the next steps?
Yeah, so there's two, I suppose there's 2 responses really. There's a conservative management, and then there's a surgical management. So certainly I'd say in New Zealand, and we've worked with initially there's Mr. Graeme Inglis, who's an orthopedic surgeon, and he sort of modified a previous to a Bucks technique, which is a screw and wire surgical technique to stabilise it, in the pars. So he's used that, and then now Rowan Schouten, and both of them, and they've been using this in cricketers with stress fractures and getting them back to playing. So where their careers have been probably in danger of stopping because they just can't have these stress fractures heal, the surgery has certainly helped players, carry on with their careers. And there's some reasonably well-known examples in the cricket world of that happening. So there is a surgical technique, and we can talk about that in a little bit, but conservatively, that's always the initial way of doing things. So it's always, if you present with a stress fracture or a stress reaction, it's always about conservative management initially. So really it's a period of rest. Now the MRI so previously the gold standard, if you like, for observing fractures have been CT scans. Obviously, the problem with CT scan is the radiation and the exposure to radiation. So doing lots of CT scans to monitor if this is healing or not is potentially problematic. So there is now an adjunct to the MRI, which is called MRI with vibe, and that's a relatively new thing. Again, mainly working with the Australians, and they've done a lot of work in this area. It's just it gives you a pretty good bony image, so you can effectively look at the healing without the radiation exposure. So you can do serial MRIs to observe the healing, and that's been a really important thing, and probably what we've found. And back in the day, before these, I suppose, high-tech imaging, it was really just a 12-week period, 3 months, rest for 3 months, and then get back into it, build yourself up and see how you go. We didn't really have any idea of whether these things were healing or not. The ones that we probably observed were the ones that they had 3 months off, and then they would try and come back to play, and then they would fail, and we'd CT them again and say, oh, it's still broken, if you like, there's still a stress fracture. So at that point, I think there's now, we know there's a group that have a much longer period that require for healing. Everyone has a slightly different, rate of healing and all those kinds of things. So the MRI with vibe has been a really important evolution. And I said, as it allows us to monitor the healing, and then we can basically work on when they start their bowling based on the bony union and things that is being observed. So that's been really, really important. So conservative management bony healing, really important to try and make sure you get that bony healing. There is staged progressions, if you like, which is range of movement, your general things, just general range of movement, making sure your other parts. So if we're looking at lumbar stress fractures, the important things from a range of movement point of view, making sure you've got thoracolumbar movement, you've got lumbopelvic movement, you've got hip and pelvis movement. So all those segments are able to move well independently, so that when they come together, that they're working well as a unit. So that range of movement is really important. Then the general strength, again, legs and glutes, etc., really important. Abdominal training, so building up that strength. And again, we tend to use linear strength first, and then move into a rotational component second, because of the stresses that go onto that part. And then running, so then the ground reaction force part. So the idea of building strength and then moving into ground reaction, which is building your running base up again and high speed running. And then we move into the bowling specific start, and again, starting from walking, bowling, and then into jogging with bowling, and increasing from there, and then back into your match play. So that's, as I said, the conservative management is based on bony healing and then building up. Surgical wise, so the technique is basically 2 screws through the pedicles, and then they do a figure of 8 wire loop around the 2 screws, and then they basically tighten them up, and it just creates a tension, if you like, around that segment. It's not an intersegmental fusion, so it's purely based on the 2 pedicles of that one segment, and basically tying the pedicle to the anterior body, and that's the idea of it. So you still maintain range of movement, but it gives that segment the strength or the stability that it probably needs to create healing and to avoid further stress into that area. The problem is a wee bit like perhaps yours, Mariana. Were you different levels of your stress fracture? Yeah. So that would be a really challenging case. So if you were a fast bowler and you came and said, I can't bowl anymore, what can you do for me? Then from a surgical point of view, it'd be then trying to decide, okay, what level do we do? Because we can't do multiple levels. We can just do one level. So you've got to work out then from a surgical point of view, which level do they choose to stabilise. And that's been definitely cases, where they've had to do that. Players have come in with multiple levels, and they've had to try and choose the main one that they think is causing the most problems. So
that was going to be one of my questions, because if you stabilize, how you don't lose the range of motion, because you said that it's not like a fusion, so it's a different technique, right? So I don't think that in most cases they use these techniques, not like normal people that are not athletes. So I was just curious that was going to be one of my questions that I think you already answered. It's just interesting that I never heard about this type of stabilization that allow you to have the normal range of motion. But as you said, not in all levels. So if you have, that's going to be like a probably more complicated situation. And when do they decide to do this surgery? After the conservative treatment fails?
Yeah, pretty much. So it obviously depends. Some players will have one conservative effort, and if that fails, they try and come back. If it fails, they'll move straight to surgery. Some will have 2, 3, 4 conservative goes, and it might be based on that they have a season or 2 where they're reasonably okay. They have another episode and they go, oh, well, I'll try again, so sometimes I've had 2 or 3 goes at the conservative management, and then they'll move to then it becomes it's just not working. So the surgery becomes the option, and it's probably at that point in time where it's saying, like, I can't bowl anymore. It's too sore, and I'm not able to play, at the level that I need to be able to play, and that becomes the determining factor, along with other factors. Do you have is there significant disc degeneration? Is there facet joint arthropathy, and all these other things that potentially could be pain generators and therefore complicate the picture a little bit. So it's not always a cut and dry decision, but and then, as we said, the multi-level thing becomes a problem. What level do we go with if we do go down this road? So generally, those ones are the end of the road. There was a player in Australia, and he was in that situation probably where his career, if he didn't, it was the last gasp sort of effort to try and keep his career going, and he had multiple levels and stuff, and he's been successful in getting back to playing and continuing to play to this day. So he's had a good result with it. So
awesome. And just one more question about the conservative part. So when you are waiting for the process of the bone healing, do you do anything else, or is just like time?
No, definitely. The keeping fit, so trying to maintain cardio fitness, so non-impact stuff. Using the bike. Obviously, for things like water-based, we might use water-based running, but swimming is such freestyle, and where you become extension focused, we probably avoid that in the initial part. And that's a little bit to do more with motor patterning, so trying to, keep out of the extension bias, if you like. So fitness, strength, so non-weight bearing strength for a start. So things like leg extension, leg curl, those kind of things initially to maintain leg strength, and then we can move into the more without the plyometric or the ground reaction stuff, but squats, deadlifts, those types of lunges, all those types of things, hip thrusts, to build more strength again before we then move into that I suppose more dynamic efforts in your plyometrics and leading into running and those kind of things. So definitely, and that's in that 12 month sort of, you look at roughly, we've from the MRI with thigh, we've probably found that the healing is more like 16 weeks now. So we'd probably use, if we were to use anything now without the use of imaging, we'd probably say 16 weeks to be really safe for the majority of people. That would probably be the time length before we would start looking to bowl people again. So that's probably that time period, and in that time you could pretty much, you might have a couple of weeks of relative rest where you just let everything settle. Most of these ones you might have remembered, Mariana, but within a week or two of stopping your activity, especially bowling, they're pretty much pain-free. So, walking around, doing all everyday activities becomes symptom-free, and it becomes very frustrating because, you feel like you could why can't I just go out and go for a run, go and, bowl or do whatever. But we know that if they do, as soon as they do go back to bowling, they become symptomatic again. So, it is a very frustrating process for people to not be able to do things when they pretty much can do everything else that they like.
I know.
So, and it's and the psychology that goes with that, is really, especially in high intensity sport, if you like. But even for like you say, as an 11-year-old, they're trying to keep you off your sport for 12 or 16 weeks that's tough.
Yes. And my final question related to cricket. So what are the other injuries related to cricket, and how do you manage them?
So, we have, your general, calf, hamstring, quad strains, soft tissue stuff. Probably for bowling, going back to bowling, because it is the main one from a physical perspective, probably side strains or internal oblique tears of the abdomen. They're probably one of the big ones, and one of the ones that are reasonably unique to cricket. They do happen in pitching and those kinds of things, javelin as well. But certainly for cricket, it's a big one. That's another one probably can take a bowler out for 6 or 8 weeks, while you try and rehabilitate them back to that level of fitness with the rotation and everything that goes with it. So that's probably a big one from a bowling perspective. The other one, very similar again, and we have used a lot of research from baseball, is throwing. So shoulders, and it's probably one that doesn't necessarily stop a lot of our players from playing, but it does impair their performance. So they find it difficult to throw, and with the emphasis going now on certainly on the athletic side of the game, it's becoming faster, and fielding and all those things is becoming really important. If you are not able to throw, and certainly if you're not able to throw very well, you'd have to be very good at either bowling or batting to get picked. So it becomes a performance issue and a selection issue. So throwing and being able to, from a performance point of view, so being able to have a good throw, a fast throw, when you think of a boundary being 70 metres from the boundary to the wickets, so it's a reasonably long throw, and trying to run people out is important. So the throwing is probably another one, which becomes a performance issue as well as an injury issue as well.
No, it makes sense. If you stop to really understand this part, you can relate to all the movements and the injuries. So that's very interesting. So Dayle, let's transition now to the final questions. What is your favorite resource of information? Any books or specific papers, studies that you like in particular? Yeah,
so I suppose for me, and I'm obviously biased towards cricket, and if we talk about that and specifically, and probably the lumbar spine stuff, there's obviously a heap of stuff, isn't there? On all sorts of different things. But research is probably, for me, is a really important avenue for information. I think, we look back from an Australian point of view, they've done a lot of great stuff in cricket research. And that goes, there's a physio over there called Patrick Farhart. He did a lot of good stuff with Carolyn Finch and Rebecca Dennis around load and the emphasis on load and how that has an impact on stress fractures. So it's probably some of the original stuff. John Orchard's done a lot of stuff around injury surveillance, so the epidemiology of injuries, especially in cricket. He's also done rugby league and things over in Australia. So he's been really influential, and he's still involved in cricket, which is great. So injury surveillance, he's been a really good source of information. And then lately, Alex Contouris, who's from Australia, and a guy called Kevin Sims, and I've done a lot of work around this MRI and the use of that and observing that bone marrow edema, and then also the healing through vibe, and those sort of papers around 2018, 2020. It's another paper by Singh in 2020 as well, which looked at the healing and use of use of MRI and that. So I suppose those are the papers, if you like, research articles. I think, I'm obviously old, Mariana. So, but certainly some of the books, Stuart McGill from America, The Ultimate Back Fitness and Performance book. I found that really fascinating. That was about 2004. And then there was another one just simply called Stress Fractures, which was Peter Bruckner, Kim Burnell. They're both from Australia, sports physicians. And that was a really good couple of resources there if you're looking at stress fractures and things. So they're probably, I think, from a physio point of view and stress fractures specifically, that sort of group of has been really interesting and still doing some good work. Again, I think, you can use, look at business, and I have done a bit of sort of reading around from extrapolating business into sport. And I think, the good to great Jim Collins those kind of books I think you can take a lot of that stuff out of that from a business point of view, but it still has I think an influence or into a medical situation as well. So
awesome. A lot of good books and studies. And what would be the best advice you can give to clinicians that are starting their careers?
Yeah, gosh, I think being inquisitive, read a lot, read widely. I think, read around a lot of the, rather than just reading one person's opinion. I think it's important to read around it as well. Read different people's opinions to make sure you get a good sort of understanding of a topic. So I think that's really important. I think, being able to try things and I wouldn't say failing is the objective, but, it's okay if it doesn't work. You'll learn, we all learn things from things that perhaps don't work as much as we learn from things that do work. And then it's that, if it does work, why does it work? Likewise, if it fails, why does it fail? So those, again, that sort of inquisitive thing, it's, as I said, it's not saying it's, failure is an objective, but if it's not perhaps working, then that's okay. As long as you're trying things and you can work out why it didn't work, as long as you reflect on it. So I think that reflective piece, really important. And just, I think, especially nowadays, work really hard, be patient, I think is, sometimes these things take a bit of time, and I think focusing on being the best you can be right now, rather than, like, sometimes it's, it's all, everyone's wanting to get to the next thing, whatever that is, and they want to do that now rather than perhaps, just be really good at what you're doing right now. There's nothing wrong with having a goal or an aim of being something in the future, but I think, keep your eye on the prize and be really good with what you're doing right now, or try and be as good as you can.
So I think you kind of answered my next questions. Let's see if you have something else to add to that. So what personal qualities and abilities that you think are important to become a successful PT?
Yeah. I said, I think that inquisitive nature, that the reading widely, but I think, from a PT perspective, being a good listener, I think, is really important. Listen well. So that's often hard to do, but I think, really listening is really important. I think from a sporting point of view, if you like, I think be passionate about being a physio, and not a fan. So I think sometimes, you can get drawn into a sport that you love, and it's just about being involved in the sport, and you actually become almost a fan rather than a physio. So I think from a sporting perspective is be passionate about your physio and what that can add to things, rather than getting too carried away with the team or whoever you're dealing with specifically. But I think, and generally, I think especially in a team, if you're looking at sport, being humble, I think it's always it's not a right, and it's I think we've got to be very, especially in these times as well, we've got to care for other people and be nice to everyone around.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very hard when you are a super fan to also be rational and think as a PT and what is best for this person, for the team, and yeah. So Dayle, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. And I really appreciate you sharing all your knowledge, your experience in the sport. And if people want to learn more information about you, how they can contact you?
Good question. I am on LinkedIn. I am on that. And I think you can just search Dayle Shackel, Dayle Shackel, and that's probably the best place for me. I do check that from time to time, and then email as well, which is just Dayle Dale.Shackel@nzc.nz.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dayle. I really appreciate. We learn a lot about stress fractures here in the sport and a lot of good information. So I really appreciate.
No problem. Thank you very much for the invitation, Mariana.